speaking for the union or for him, that's his business, but it's certainly important to us to kind of know where that is. Secondly, at Local 26, they were having a tough year anyway because a lot of the industrial work that has been scheduled for 2021, 2020 was slated to be kind of a down year anyhow. But right now, Todd Taylor thinks that about 60+% of his workforce is currently unemployed or out of work on the out of work list.
Ouch. So let's talk service, right? We really didn't talk much about service last week. So what can you tell us what's going on in the service world, and what kind of unique challenges are they facing?
Yeah, that service is, first of all, in service, I do know, and I know some of you are going to participate, or at least MCAA is going to have a service webinar coming up on their webpage. You can go to the MCAA webpage and find out when that's going to be. Robin and I have a virtual meeting today with the MCA Western Washington Service Committee to talk to them about what they want to do and what they want to present to our local members in terms of the challenges. So we are still exploring exactly what some of the challenges are for service, but glad you asked it. We wanted to address it here. We actually ran into one of our service supervisors yesterday on the street going to a service call, and this is a person who I've known for a number of years. Actually, I've known him since he was an apprentice, and now he's a senior supervisor for one of our member firms. And he was pretty busy with taking care of calls and getting into buildings and all that. He said it's pretty consistent that in many buildings, particularly with his medical and lab clients, they have to either take a temperature or be go through some sort of a protocol to enter the building. But he said everybody was just so darn glad to see him, and they got him in there, and that his service crew was so used to working alone anyway, which is kind of what they do in their bands and working together and all that. And so it's really not only protection of them, but protection of the clients that they're visiting and the type of client. So there are some unique aspects to that. I'm not sure I fully understand what they all are. It was fun to run into him yesterday, but we're going to be exploring those questions with our service group, and then we'll come up with topics hopefully that maybe or should be different than what MCAA is presenting on a local level. And then we'll schedule a session like this with those topics in mind after we meet with the service committee. Okay,
awesome. So are there out of work members who, are really wanting to work right now? And, how do we then potentially match those people up with, that employer, right, who's looking for a very specific need?
Yeah, we're still figuring that out. I know from both the business managers that there are people on the out of work list who prefer to work than be on unemployment. And so there are a number of, a little later we'll kind of talk about our protocols and the health surveys and that. But if a worker, if our employers have workers who don't want to work, there are people on the out of work list who do. So if there are job opportunities out there and our employers need to staff that, there are people on the out of work list who want to work. And so just have to work through their normal channels with their labor supervisors and local and dispatching to find those people and get them to work in terms of what skills are needed and all that. But both locals assured me that there are people that want to work.
Okay, awesome. So you mentioned the health surveys. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? These health surveys, we have them on the service side, but we also are having them on the essential project side. Are you hearing more about that, and can you give us some more details?
Yeah, and I'll start on that. I'm going to ask Scott to give his perspective on that too. Yeah, we're having a lot of inquiries about these health surveys, and spend a little bit of time here. It is probably one of the things we get the most questions about, and they're health surveys. There are different protocols for people entering buildings or projects. There are also have been referred to as liability waivers by both building trades, the unions and employers. And we've offered some guidance in our messages to principals about those. And our number one thing is it's really up to the employer to decide to what impact those forms that employees are being asked to sign as they enter a project it's really up to the employer to decide to what extent those affect their liability within the contract arrangement that they have for that project. So that's the number one thing. Once that's determined, we advise the employers to make sure they understand them and what those impacts are in terms of what do those surveys mean and what are the remedies if someone lies or there's an exposure or something that's one of our contractors or one of our contractor member employees, what are the impacts of that? And we leave that to each employer to determine that because they all have different risk tolerances. We then suggest that the employer notify the employees, the stewards, and the supervisors exactly what those protocols are and what they mean and what we're supposed to do. And then we also suggest very strongly that employers allow an employee to not enter a job site or not go to work, and if they don't have any other work, lay them off so that they can access unemployment benefits. I was aware yesterday of an employee who has a child with leukemia at home who has a very an immune system, affected immune system, and that employee does not want to jeopardize obviously his child's health, and so doesn't want to go to the jobs. And I think so those is an extreme example, but it's one that we need to respect employees, and if they can't do those conditions of entering the job site, then that should be allowed. Also, too, we also know that some of the protocols on these jobs require certain cleaning procedures and other procedures, and we're warning our member firms to make sure they provide notice under the contract that if those that change conditions that affect productivity, they should be providing notice. Scott, this might be a good time to, we're aware of the governor's, of the request by building trades that the request of the building trades is made of the governor to be able to make certain job site procedures standard. And I don't know, you and I have talked a little bit about that. Do you want to address that anyway?
Well, there's a meeting today, AWB, BIAW, AGC, the operators, the carpenters, and the building trades are having a meeting at 1:30 with Governor Inslee's staff today to go over how they might be able to get construction back up and running. As you mentioned, there are a number of protocols and procedures that the building trades are asking for their folks for this to happen. We had a construction industry call yesterday. It's unlikely that anything's going to change based on that call. I mean, I don't think we're going to have anything earth-shattering today, and probably nothing's going to change until May 4th. But the hope is when the order lifts, you know, we might see construction start to pick back up if some of these procedures are in place. And I know you took a close look at that list that Mark Riker, the Washington Building Trades exec, has put forth as basically these need to be in place for our folks to go back to work. And maybe you had some concerns about that may actually take us in the wrong direction.
Yeah, that's what you and I talked about. I think these protocols, we believe that the protocol shouldn't be in any form of an order from the governor, that those protocols should be under control. Well, we have statutory requirements for people that own sites and the general contractor under their liability requirements. And we think that's where it ought to lie, so that it's customized for each site. And I'm not going to say the protocols are unreasonable. I mean, they're there to protect the worker, and we certainly respect that. The only thing that I'll say is that for some projects, it might be overkill and unnecessary, and the impacts to productivity and the cost, it's unlikely that contractors under any sort of a cost arrangement, whether it be a guaranteed max or anything, have those sort of protocols priced into the productivity of their project. And so that's a significant changed impact that we think ought to be left to each site as to how they gear up. So we'll have to see that plays out.
I think what will also be interesting is, you know, obviously with BIA, you know, the focus of what you guys all do is commercial and industrial, and having BIAW at the table for some of these conversations, obviously their work is residential, and to see kind of where, I mean, they have one or two folks on where that could be different, obviously, with a big commercial construction site. So it'll be interesting to see the fallout from these talks with the governor, and we'll certainly keep on top of that.
Okay, cool. Hey, so I have a question. I know the state has said they're working on reducing the annual budget by like $450 million or something like that. Do you know if any current or future construction projects are a part of that?
Boy, I don't. Scott, do you know anything about that?
I don't. You know, I can take a closer look at the budget specifics. What I have seen so far is I haven't seen anything suggesting that there's any construction, direct construction impacts. In other words, nothing being cut out. I see other programs being impacted, but not construction.
Okay, great. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, we'll have to keep our eyes on that, Leah. That's a good question. The way that the funding normally works, and of course, nothing's normal about this whole thing, but the way it works is that the projects that are in progress now have been funded by a previous biennium budget, and generally they don't affect those. It could affect the income, the state general fund and financing going in the future so a future biennium and projects that, if you're a public body and had asked the state for money and it's in the next biennium budget, you might be in jeopardy. But I'm going to say, man, I've stopped saying that, you know, this isn't going to happen, because almost everything has happened under this thing so quickly. It is rare for the state to reverse a biennium budget on a project that's in progress.
Gotcha. Okay. So back to some of our union workers. Can you talk about, I know there's been several inquiries about healthcare coverage for unemployed union workers. Do you know much about that, and can you give us any details?
I do, yeah, thanks, Leah. The inquiries too has come from not only the union, but from our employers, particularly a couple of employers in particular who are concerned about ongoing healthcare coverage for their employees. Now, there are some statutory requirements to maintain health care coverage for those employees who are on family medical leave, and Scott knows much more about than I do. But in general, we've actually built into the health trust for both Locals 26 and Local 32, and I'm on both those trusts that provide the health care for those workers. There's something called a dollar bank, and when an employee works a number of hours, over a certain amount of hours per month, they build up a reserve in their dollar bank to be able to pay for future months of coverage. Probably 70% of the workers right now have at least 1 month extra of coverage in their dollar bank to be able to provide future coverage of healthcare. And then that goes up to a maximum of 5 months of coverage. And so if an employee's been working a long time, they probably have 5 months. If they're relatively new to the workforce, they may only have a month or maybe even zero coverage. In that particular case, the trust actually subsidizes healthcare coverage for workers who are on the out-of-work list and available for work, and it's heavily subsidized so that those workers who are out of work are not and exhaust their dollar bank and go on and have a COBRA payment. The COBRA is heavily subsidized by the trust. There is concern that has been raised by both employers in the union that there are a number of new workers in the workforce who are organized in or even apprentices who don't have enough dollar bank coverage for future months of coverage. And the trust is currently exploring things that we can do, or things that the trust can do to be able to further reduce those COBRA costs or increase those subsidies. And we're in the process actually right now of trying to evaluate what those are. Of course, that costs money and you have to evaluate that. We're fortunate that the trust does have its own reserves, but we have to be careful how those reserves are because we're not sure where this is going to take us in the long term. But we are exploring those options and want to make sure that our employees are covered and have the health care available to them.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks, Ed. Apprenticeship. We've been hearing conversations, that there's some conversations about potential changes to the 2021 school year. Do we have any more information about that? And is that true?
Yeah, it is true. There's a lot, and I see several of you on the call that are on the on our apprenticeship committees, the Seattle Area Pipe Trades JTC and Local 26 EdDev JTC. So I see many of you participate on that, as well as on the trust. It's a moving target. So number one is that what are we doing about hours for apprentices who are required to get the number of hours, the minimum number of hours for the current school year, which is currently suspended, and it probably will be out for the rest of the school year, just like the K-12 system through June. We're evaluating that, or the trusts are evaluating that along with the JTCs, and that it appears that for the most part, those apprentices should have the minimum number of hours. We actually teach over the minimum required statutory amount currently, and so I think in many cases, apprentices would have banked enough hours to meet the statutory minimum. But we're evaluating that, and we're going to have to come up with a plan if that doesn't work. And I know both the trusts, PJ Moss and Heather in the Seattle area, and Jed Hildebrand and Local 26 are on top of that, looking at those numbers and seeing how that's all going to work out. Additionally, I'm actually on the State Apprenticeship Council. I suspect that the Apprenticeship Council will be approached with some sort of an initiative or resolution to be able to allow flexibility for apprenticeship programs so that they get their minimum number of hours and all that. So that's two things. Your question also looked to the next year. The Seattle Area Pipe Trades has been exploring something called block training. And initially that training was explored for HVACR service refrigeration techs, apprentices, to be able to for purposes of capacity, best use of the building, best training principles, and a bunch of other stuff, do block training where the apprentices come in for a week at a time at different intervals throughout the year. And that process had been pretty well vetted with many of our employers, the service supervisors, people who manage these people, the people themselves, instructors, and I don't want to get into all the details. It's a very well vetted process that was ready to be unveiled for the school year beginning in September. Because of what we just have gone through, the Seattle Area Pipe Trades, Heather, PJ, and along with a bunch of other people, some of whom are on this call, to work with them to establish the same sort of block training for plumbers and pipe fitters next year, which would mean that for the most part, the apprentices will be going to daytime school during blocks of time during 5-10-hour days, a week at a time training on a scheduled basis. And while the supervisors feel that this is going to require that they do a little closer scheduling, it is going to allow those apprentices to have more effective training and for us to be able to train more effectively. And in the case that we just went through, we could actually suffer through another 2-month delay or closure of the school. The block training would be least impacted, unlike it is today. So the answer is yes, we are exploring. And the trust yesterday at my trust meeting gave direction to the Seattle Area Pipe Trades Trust to continue with exploring block training beginning school year September of next year, 2020 to 2021, for all trades, and to work with the workshop groups to be able to minimize and make sure everybody understands the scheduling impacts. I will say that it's been well received and well recognized by service companies, or not by all our employers, large and small, as to what the impacts are. And it seems like it's a workable plan for us and solves a number of problems. It also creates a few which we need to mitigate. So there are changes in apprenticeship. As I mentioned in our call last week, I remain concerned that we keep those apprentices. It's difficult, particularly for 1-, 2-, and 3-year apprentices who really haven't had a chance to build up a reserve to stay engaged in our industry. And I hope our industry gets back to work so we can get those apprentices back to work and not lose any of the apprentices that we've invested in.
Thanks for that, Ed. That was super helpful. So kind of switching topics here a little bit, a couple questions that I had that we didn't get to address last week. Are you guys hearing anything about how well the unemployment process is working in the state of Washington? And You know, is it easy? Is it tough? Is it getting better? What are your thoughts?
Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, so I know that there were some initial hiccups with the, as some of you may know, the State Employment Security Department passed emergency rules to allow for unemployment in situations where in the past you couldn't get it. For example, being on, you know, standby because of a shutdown, and a temporary type of a shutdown, and I know there were some glitches there in their computer system trying to catch up with somebody's applying for benefits online. Their system is denying the benefits because it's set up from, you know, the way in the past they know you can't get unemployment. And so I know there were some glitches there early on with that, but I've also been told that they're hiring something like 100,000 or a number of new workers are going over to ESD, some that there are new workers, some are coming over from other state agencies to try to mitigate some of those impacts of being flooded with requests for benefits on a federal level. I know just in terms of overall with unemployment, with the bill that the CARES Act that just passed is going to really, I think, help out with supplementing income for unemployment purposes. You'd have the state unemployment, and then this is going to give folks that are on unemployment an additional $600 a week to try to get them more back to being made whole while they're unemployed. But yeah, there's been some significant impacts at the state level.
All right. On that same vein, Scott, have you heard anything over the last week about the small business loan program, you know, the federal program? How is the application process? Is it working? What have you heard there?
Yeah, so I would say that we did send out that's a good question, Lee. We did send out a memo to principals, MCA principals about, with a lot of details about the CARES Act, and we can get that to folks that haven't seen it. But I will say that the payment protection program that was a part of the CARES Act is offering you can get up to a $10 million loan through your lender. It's administered by the Small Business Administration, but the loan is, you actually would go to your lender with this. And it's set up, Leah, in a way intentionally to, I mean, there's not as much underwriting as there is in a typical SBA, like some of you might know what an EIDL loan is, economic injury disaster loan. This is a little bit different. It's actually set up to be much more lax in terms of underwriting to get the money into the hands of businesses that desperately need it right now to keep going. And then if you are using this money for payroll, mortgage, rent, certain operating expenses, that loan can actually be completely forgiven. And obviously you need to work that out with, you know, talk to your financial advisor or your CPA, lender, so forth, to make sure you have all those details dialed in when you apply for the loan. But it's also set up to convert from a loan to a grant.
Okay.
And yeah.
Great. All right. So let's kind of wrap things up here. Ed, do you have anything positive to tell us? Any glimmers of hope? Anything?
Oh, I'm, you know, I'm same thing you heard from my positive is, you know, we'll get through this. I remain convinced there's a huge appetite for construction that's going to be delayed or deferred, and we are going to get this back. It'll be challenging for sure, but we are going to get this back. Leah, you asked me about something positive, and this isn't positive, but it came to mind. And before we close, I do want to bring it up just so we listen to it as a membership. We have had. We are aware of a couple of major clients who have asked for a discount of services from our contractors for certain work in progress. And gee, it's tough for us right now. Can you knock 10% off your price to us? And I got it, because this is sort of public. I don't know if the Chinese are listening or not right now, but because we post this publicly, I guess each employer's got to make their own decisions about that. It's strictly an employer decision on whether they, you know, or contractor decision on whether they want to do that. as it reflects to the labor right now, I'm negotiating a 10% discount in labor rates, which are a huge component of our cost. In other words, I suspect that for many of our members, a 10% flat off the top decrease would be very difficult without cutting the cost basis. In other words, there's not enough in it, typically under the national statistics that are public, to be able to take that sort of a discount without lowering the cost basis for labor. And labor right now isn't interested in doing that. Plus, that's a major lift to be able to negotiate a new labor rate in today's terms. And so, as difficult as that is, we'll have to see how that all plays out. I think this is more of a value proposition. The construction industry and the people that our members employ have delivered value over the years and have built up a great a deal of workforce skills and availability to deliver that value. And I think that's where we got to concentrate. So we'll see where that is. I was made aware of that. We'll see where that all goes. Like I say, it's up to each contractor to decide what they want to do with their clients. We don't care one way or the other, but we are in charge of labor relations, and it's unlikely that at this point that the locals that we bargain with are interested in renegotiating labor rates, at least at this time. That might change next year. Who knows?
Okay. All right. Awesome. Thanks, Ed. And before I turn it back over to Robin, I just want to encourage everybody, send your questions to Ed and Scott to let us know what you're thinking. And if there's any other things that you want us to address as far as these weekly quick connections, also please let us know, give us all those ideas and keep them coming. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Robin.
Thank you, Leah. And I'm just trying to pull up a slide here so that everybody can see. So thank you, Leah, Ed, and Scott. And stay tuned on Thursday. We actually have Dr. Dan Diamond coming as a guest. You've seen him on this past weekend on Q13 Fox News. And he is an international disaster doctor and understands a lot about dealing with emotions in this day and age. So feel free to tune in on that on Thursday at 2 p.m. And I'm trying to get the slide up. So sorry. I don't know why it's not sharing my screen. Anyway, you can email Ed Kommers, ecommerce@mcaww.net with any additional questions. And with that, I wish you all a great day and take care, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody.